Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and right now I want to talk about President Herbert Hoover's administration. Herbert Hoover was our 31st American president and one of our worst presidents. Well, there's some things that he is remarkable for, but not as a result of his presidency. Prior to Herbert Hoover becoming president, he was a very effective administrator and humanitarian. He led many great humanitarian relief agencies uh, all over the world, and he'd been a successful businessman as a minor. So he was a self-made millionaire. He graduated from Stanford. I think he's our first president and possibly only president who went to Stanford University when Stanford was newly created. And he was an orphan who, made good, of himself very early on. However, when he became president, although he came into presidency, in a landslide, he had about 58% of the popular vote and over, 80 something percent of the electoral vote, colored vote. But he, as a result of some of his policies, which were also racist, he ended up having a very terrible administration, and also due to his policy. Due to his own personality, apart from policy, he wasn't a charismatic person. He wasn't a good speaker, and but let me get into it. I'll do a subsequent video that I might just talk about, his life and his biography. But right now, I want to focus on some um, some of the salient features of his administration and the failures. So, first of all, I want to talk about something going on. Today we're living in the era of anti-immigration again. And they say history repeats itself, which is true. I'm a historian, and today we see ICE raids, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Um, we see these raids and how they go into people's houses, and in fact, they've been deporting American citizens as well. Just violating rights of individuals and due process. Well, this isn't new. This happened under President Herbert Hoover's administration, and in fact, he instigated, he encouraged it. He encouraged the removals of American citizens. So he's notorious for what was called the Mexican Repatriation, which occurred between 1929 and 1936. So after the stock market crash of 1929 and eventual Great Depression that followed, um, of course, uh, Herbert Hoover himself and his administration blamed what was going on, you know, on immigrants, especially Mexican Americans, right? And so during that period, uh, he started to encourage and a lot of anti-Mexican, you know, sentiment in America, and so uh, in fact, so he would, his federal administration would actually start to put pressure on local governments and state governments to deport, to remove and coerce, um, Mexicans to leave America, because he now started saying, well, Americans didn't have jobs because Mexicans were taking their jobs. So the objective was to remove these Mexicans so that they could retain jobs for white Americans, because the era of Great Depression, there was massive unemployment, and so his constituency, Herbert Hoover's constituency was white Americans, and so he was saying that, well, that white Americans didn't have jobs because Mexicans were taking the jobs, and so he started to incite anti-Mexican sentiment, and he used federal pressure to actually force some of these state governments and other local entities to coerce Mexicans to leave America and just self-deport to Mexico. And what is ironic, what is sad, is that about 60% of the people who left America, Mexicans who left, were actually American citizens. 60% of them. So that's between the period of 1929 and between the period of 1929 and period of 1929 and 1936. So that was called the Mexican Repatriation of Herbert Hoover's administration. So the methods that they used, this particularly happened in California and Texas, in Los Angeles, and methods they would use was that the LAPD and local sheriff offices, they would raid the homes of Mexicans. They would raid their homes, and they just locked them up, and they created these terrible conditions for them so that they couldn't work. They would lock them up, and just to force them to eventually leave. And so in fact, at the time of the Great Depression, one of the things that hurt Herbert Hoover was that he refused and he resisted federal government intervention. He believed that the federal government shouldn't handle relief and humanitarian efforts, right? This was his thing. He thought that it was something that the states were responsible for. And so that was part of what also made him highly unpopular during the era of the Great Depression, and gave FDR, the landslide victory, because Franklin D. Roosevelt believed that it was, the work of government, the federal government, to actually intervene aggressively and to give employment to people, employment and relief to Americans. At the time, FDR was governor of New York, and even though he was really doing what Hoover was saying he believed in, that it's the states that are responsible, because when it's the states that are responsible for providing humanitarian relief, and during the Great Depression, when Governor Roosevelt, FDR, was governor of New York, that was what he did. He intervened massively. The state of New York intervened to provide relief to suffering New Yorkers. So, however, as I was saying, Herbert Hoover used propaganda, a lot of and federal officials to put pressure on state governments and local entities to coerce Mexicans, including Mexican Americans, American citizens, who happen to be Mexicans, to self-deport. They would raid them. They would charge them with offenses and say, well, if you, however, return to Mexico, we drop, these charges. And so, unfortunately, so about 300,000 to 2 million Mexicans relocated to Mexico at the time. Again, 60% of them, unfortunately, were American citizens, and they were denied their due process rights. Now, this is particularly important to me because I will mention something about it. I'll draw a parallel to my experience today. I'm an American citizen, and I've given my spiel about how I was raided in my home on May 16, 2023, and trumped-up charges were filed against me. I have not had my day in court, so it's going on 3 years now. I was removed from my home. Somebody filed a false emergency petition. A demented man, Jide Warere, filed a false emergency evaluation petition, making all sorts of fabrications and perjury, and 40 cops raided me in my home. I was injured. I was shot in the head with taser darts, removed, dehumanized, and I was locked up. I haven't had a trial to date. The charges that were filed were all fabricated, and I haven't had my day in court. I'm entitled to my Sixth Amendment right to defend myself in court, to have a fair and speedy trial, right, and a jury of my peers. I haven't had that. They've had these fake charges. Now, what happened during President Hoover's period, during the Mexican repatriation, where 300,000 to 2 million Mexicans were removed in order to preserve jobs for white Americans? They were repatriated, relocated back to Mexico, and 60% of them being American citizens, and the local governments filed charges against them and, coerced them to actually go back and stay in Mexico. ended up experiencing the parallel, right? So I was removed from my home with false charges. I was placed under house arrest for a long time. I was locked up in jail for 9 months without a trial. I'm an innocent man. In America, we are innocent until proven guilty. These are trumped up charges. Now, if the state can prove their case, okay, we do it in a court of law. I'm the one who was a victim of an operation by Montgomery County Police, right? What is ironic and, about what's happening today, and where I draw a parallel with what happened during the Hoover administration, when local governments filed charges against American citizens who happen to be Mexicans and repatriated them, coerced them to leave, made conditions unlivable for them in America, and forced them to leave during the Great Depression era between 1929 and 1936. I'm experiencing it today because these charges were filed against me even though I was working in the federal government, and then I had a new position in the federal government at the Pentagon, and this Judge James Bonifant, said he wanted me to lose my federal government job. He said it, and this was in October of 2023. That's illegal, right? He felt as a great white father figure, saying he wanted me to lose my federal government job, right? That denies my liberty interest, my constitutional, my fundamental rights to work. He can't make that decision for me. So on pretext that there's a charge against me, he said he wanted me to lose my federal government job. Now, I've been working in the federal government. I'm entitled to file unemployment. I go try and file employment. When this happened, I tried to file unemployment with state of Maryland. They give me a runaround, say I should file it with Virginia. That was denied. They claimed that, well, the government said they didn't fire me. Apparently, they hadn't processed anything. So I've never received unemployment. So I've been using my resources, my savings, waiting for a trial. Meanwhile, the judge does not allow me to travel. So through Maryland's agency, right? It's not the federal government doing this, right? Through Maryland, right? An agency of the state of Maryland, which is the one that's filed trumped up charges against me after raiding me in my own home. They now make a suggestion. They now suggest through, an agency of the state of Maryland, they suggest that, well, if I go back to Nigeria and never come back, they will dismiss the charges against me. And if I come back to America, they'll bring the charges against me. You haven't proven your charges. The fact that charges have been filed, right? I'm still innocent until proven guilty. I'm the one who was the victim, right? I'm the one who's been maligned and slandered by the state of Maryland. And I'm saying these charges are fake. We only get to prove it in the court of law, right? There was prosecutorial misconduct and police misconduct when those fake charges were filed against me without an arrest warrant, when the police raided me in my home, and I want my day in court. That's what I've been waiting for over 2 years. Now, the judge made conditions unlivable for me by saying, well, he's not going to let me go back to work. He wants me to lose my job. I did lose my job. I haven't had a job for over 2 years. I had a job in the federal government, and I have a property interest in it, right? So you can see what was happening in 1929 during the era of the Great Depression, when state agencies, state governments would raid Mexicans in their home, including American citizens, file charges against them, coerce them, induce them to go back to self-deport and go back to Mexico. They would harass Mexicans during the Hoover administration, and Herbert Hoover promoted it. He encouraged it. His federal officials, they put pressure on states and local governments, saying this was, in fact, in the Midwest, in Indiana, they called it was a relief program to get Mexicans that if they can leave America, that it would create, vacancies, jobs, and opportunities for white men, and also it would reduce the drain on welfare programs or relief programs that they had in the States, because Mexicans who didn't have jobs didn't have to. Mexicans who were American citizens didn't have to, didn't have to be on the dole or whatever, for who were unemployed. So states call it a relief program by getting Mexicans to self-deport, to relocate back to Mexico. Mexicans who are American citizens. So this is sort of what the state of Maryland is doing to me, right? And it's the federal government, because incidentally, why is it the federal government? So I was working in the federal government as an auditor, and I reported fraud. That's my right. I reported fraud. I reported discrimination. I reported that, well, I'm a qualified and hardworking, highly qualified, hardworking American citizen who's been denied a certain position, or been denied, been discriminated against in pay, been denied a position, and it's my right to file for a position, and I reported it. I filed a complaint. That's my right to petition the government for that. All of a sudden, lo and behold, I'm raided by Montgomery County Police. I've never had an issue with the police, with the state, with any government agency. I'm a law-abiding American citizen. I pride myself on being a law-abiding American citizen. I hold, as of that time, I was holding a top-secret CSSCI clearance. Right? I'm a law-abiding American citizen. I was not in somebody's house. I don't live with anybody. I live alone. But I was raided on these fabrications, on these pretexts. So I'm seeing, from my experience, right, I can see these are mechanisms that, reactionary governments in the past have used. And I'm using the example of Herbert Hoover's administration, when his federal officials actually pressured local governments and state agencies in California and in Texas to raid and force the removal and relocation of Mexicans, including those who were American citizens, as a relief program to preserve jobs for white Americans, as he blamed the Great Depression on Mexican Americans taking American jobs, and that was not the case. Now, why did the Great Depression occur? I did an earlier video and I talked about the Treasury Secretary under Herbert Hoover, his Mellon Plan, in which he executed what was called the scientific form of scientific taxation, in which he said, well, eliminate taxes for the wealthy. It would allow these wealthy people to have money for investments and to engage in more risk taking, and this would create jobs. And it did raise tax revenues, right, in the 20s. However, it also fueled excessive speculation in the stock market, excessive risk taking, and the stock market eventually crashed in 1929. So this was a policy promoted by Herbert Hoover. It was his scientific taxation that caused the crash of the stock market and the decline of the economy, which led to the Great Depression and eventual unemployment amongst white Americans. But instead, Herbert Hoover blamed it on Mexican Americans taking jobs of white people. And this is common, this is something that, they say history repeats itself. I'm glad I'm a historian, right? You see these cycles in history, they come and go. In fact, I mentioned before that I used to be a stockbroker. I was a financial advisor, and this is something we study. It's part of our training. We learn that the stock market, it moves in cycles, right? It moves in cycles, and you have the bullish market, the bear market, and we're encouraged to buy during the bear market. That when there's a recession, the prices of stocks go down. But that's a great time to enter, because in time it's going to go back up again. So that's why I'm saying that you see history is in cycles. Today we are having these raids on immigrants. This huge anti-immigrant sentiment in America. This anti-immigrant hysteria, it's not new. It happened during Herbert Hoover's administration, when he blamed the stock market crash and the Great Depression on Mexican Americans, and he saw the Mexican repatriation as a relief program to provide jobs and aid to white Americans, that they'd be able to get jobs. So now something else that I want to quickly mention that was significant in Herbert Hoover's administration was uh, his Stimson doctrine, right? So, and eventually the friction between that doctrine and Japan would eventually lead to America's entry into the Second World War when Japan attacked America in 1941. So some of the unpopular actions of the ill-advised actions of Herbert Hoover, or unfortunate, I don't know. America wasn't responsible for Japan's growing militarism. So in 1931, Japan invaded and occupied Manchuria, which belonged to China, was a province of China. And after Japan had actually staged a minor explosion and blamed it on China, and so Japan occupied Manchuria and instituted a puppet government, right, in Manchuria, the Manchukuo government. And so it's caused America, Herbert Hoover's administration, they were against it, and they said they would not recognize states that were created through war of aggression, which is rather ironic since it is an obviously inconsistent policy of America, since we had over time seized a lot of nations and territories. We had a history of actually doing this, seizing territories. Our 19th century, that was what we were doing, but now we see that Herbert Hoover's administration was now following this Stimson doctrine that said that the U.S. would not recognize states that were created from wars of aggression, and it was basing this on the principle of ex injuria. What's it called again? Ex injuria non oritur. Ex injuria non oritur. Yeah, it's Latin. It means that illegal acts, illegal acts do not create law. So it's a Latin phrase, and the principle is that illegal acts do not create law. And so you see that's a rather inconsistent doctrine, and so it led to great friction between America and Japan, and eventually, of course, Japan's attack on America in 1941. By that time, Americans had fired Herbert Hoover as president due to his incompetence during the Great Depression, and of course his policies that led to the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover, those are just the things that I wanted to mention that his administration is wholly infamous for. I want to keep these videos short. Interestingly, I'd mentioned earlier that he tried to appease, the white votes in the South, and break the solid, white votes in the South, draw them away from the Democratic Party by purging, black leaders from the leadership of the Republican Party, and of course, by appeasing the lily white faction of the Republican Party. And so this was, you can see there was a lot of immigration. There was a lot of racism, marks of racism in the Herbert Hoover administration. Interestingly, though, you can see the complexity of racism. So even though he did not share the views, the non-racist views of Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover would end up hiring, double the amount of, more than the amount of blacks that both Calvin Coolidge and Warren G. Harding hired combined in their administration. So he hired a lot of blacks, but not in leadership positions, not in prominent, notable positions, but in nominal, positions that didn't matter in the federal government. And so you could see there are certain. He was a certain racist who believed that look, whites are just superior to blacks, that blacks are inferior to white people, but he believed also that through hard work and education that blacks could have a decent life in America, but they could not aspire to reach the status of equality of white people. So you can see that's one form of racism, and I find that this is something that I came up against in the federal government. There's certain racists that are in our federal government. There's certain people in our society, amongst blacks, amongst whites, who have this mentality, this racist attitude. You remember I mentioned Robert Moulton, who became leader of Tuskegee Institute after Booker T. Washington, and he had this view of black people that blacks shouldn't seek equality. They're not in fact equal, but they could be puppets of they could be marionettes of certain white people, and but they shouldn't seek equality with white people because they don't think they're equal, right? I don't know if it's as a practical matter, because they feel that whites will just resist the attempts for equality. I don't know, but this is something that Herbert Hoover espoused, and his administration would do a number of racist acts that didn't, in the end, they didn't even serve America. They only harmed America, and that's that. My name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I also draw attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the court, which I'm experiencing in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.